There is a question that has haunted every generation since the beginning of recorded thought. It is not about God. It is not about death. It is simpler than that, and harder. The question is this: what is actually up to me? Not what do I wish were up to me, not what should be up to me, but what right now, in this moment, do I genuinely control? Nearly 2,000 years ago, a man answered that question with a clarity that still cuts through the noise of modern life. He was not a king. He was not a general. He was born into slavery, given a name that literally means acquired, and walked with a permanent limp from an injury he could not prevent. He never wrote a single word. Everything we know of his teaching comes from a student who thought the ideas were too important to lose. His name was Epictetus, and this is the story of how a man who owned nothing, not even his own body, came to understand freedom more deeply than the emperors who ruled the known world. Rome, 1st century AD. The empire is at its height. Its borders stretch from the rain-soaked hills of Britain to the deserts of Syria. Roman roads connect a world that has never been more organized, more ambitious, or more brutal. In the capital, marble temples rise above streets that stink of fish and sweat and ambition. Senators debate in gilded halls, soldiers drill in courtyards, and beneath all of it, holding it up, invisible and essential, is slavery. 1 in 3 people in the Italian peninsula is enslaved. This is not a footnote in Roman history, it is the foundation. Enslaved people build the aqueducts that carry water to fountains where free citizens splash their faces. They harvest the grain that fills the bellies of philosophers debating the nature of justice. They raise the children of senators who will one day vote on whether to expand the slave trade. Slavery in Rome is not based on race as later systems would be. It is based on conquest, debt, and birth. Anyone can become a slave, a captured soldier, a bankrupt merchant, a child born to an enslaved mother. The line between freedom and servitude is thinner than most Romans care to admit. Around 50 AD, in the city of Hierapolis, in what is now southwestern Turkey, a child is born. We do not know his birth name. We do not know his mother's face. We do not know if anyone held him and whispered hopes into his ear the way parents do. What we know is what he became: property. The name we know him by, Epictetus, is not a name at all. It is a label. It means acquired, purchased, a transaction completed. He is brought to Rome and becomes the property of Epaphroditus, a wealthy and powerful freedman who serves in the court of Emperor Nero. Epaphroditus is himself a former slave who rose through the imperial household to become Nero's personal secretary. He is proof that the Roman system occasionally allows upward movement, but only within its own brutal logic. Nero's Rome is not a stable place. The emperor is erratic, paranoid, and increasingly dangerous. Political rivals disappear. Accusations of treason become death sentences delivered over dinner. Nero's own mother, Agrippina, is murdered on his orders. His wife Octavia is exiled and killed. The philosopher Seneca, once Nero's tutor and advisor, is eventually forced to take his own life. This is the air young Epictetus breathes, not the clean air of philosophical abstraction, but the suffocating atmosphere of a court where anyone can be destroyed at any moment for any reason. And yet, he is watching. He is learning something, not about power, but about its limits. The most powerful man in the world lives in constant fear. The richest men in Rome lose sleep over what the emperor might think of them tomorrow. Senators with vast estates and hundreds of slaves are paralyzed by anxiety over things they cannot control. Meanwhile, a boy with no possessions, no status, and no future worth planning for begins to notice something strange. The people who have everything are the ones who suffer most. At some point during these early years, Epictetus's leg is broken or badly injured. The details are unclear. One ancient source claims his master deliberately broke it. Another suggests it was the result of disease or accident. What is certain is that he walks with a limp for the rest of his life. There is a story, possibly apocryphal but powerful, that his master once twisted his leg while Epictetus calmly said, "You are going to break it." And when the leg snapped, he added simply, "There, I told you so." No rage, no pleading, just an observation about what was about to happen and an acceptance of what had. We cannot know whether this story is literally true, but it tells us something about how people remembered Epictetus as someone who met suffering not with resistance, but with a terrifying clarity. His leg is broken. That is a fact. It cannot be unbroken. It belongs to the category of things that are not up to him. And so the only question that matters is, what will he do with what remains? Limitation forces attention inward. When the external world offers you nothing, no comfort, no security, no promise of better days, you are forced to find something within yourself that cannot be taken. Not because you are especially brave or wise, but because there is nowhere else to go. Somehow, and the historical record is frustratingly thin on this point, Epictetus is permitted to study philosophy. Perhaps Epaphroditus sees an investment. Educated slaves are more valuable. Perhaps he recognizes something unusual in the boy's mind. Or perhaps Epictetus simply finds his way to the lectures of Musonius Rufus, the most respected Stoic teacher in Rome, and no one bothers to stop him. Musonius Rufus teaches a philosophy that is not about ideas, it is about practice. Stoicism, by the time Musonius teaches it, is already hundreds of years old. It was founded in Athens around 300 BC by Zeno of Citium, who taught on a painted porch, a stoa, which gave the philosophy its name. But Stoicism is not a dusty academic tradition. It is a living system designed for one purpose: to teach people how to live well, especially when life is hard. And Musonius strips it down to its most essential form. Philosophy, he argues, is not something you study, it is something you train. The way a wrestler trains the body, a philosopher trains the mind. You do not become wise by reading about wisdom. You become wise by practicing judgment under pressure, by choosing well when it would be easier not to, by sitting with discomfort until it stops controlling you. We suffer not from events, but from our judgments about events. This is the core insight, the idea that would later define Epictetus's entire teaching and, through him, shape the thinking of emperors, psychologists, and millions of ordinary people trying to get through difficult days. It sounds simple. It is not. Here is the framework that Epictetus builds from his teacher's foundation. It begins with a division, a line drawn through the middle of all human experience. On one side, things that are up to you, your judgments, your intentions, your desires, your responses, the way you interpret what happens, the meaning you assign to events, the effort you bring to your choices. On the other side, everything else. Your body, your reputation, your wealth, the weather, the economy, what other people think of you, what other people do to you, whether you get sick, whether you succeed, whether you are loved or ignored, or praised or condemned. Most people, Epictetus will later teach, spend their entire lives trying to control the second column. They exhaust themselves chasing money that can vanish, approval that can shift, health that will inevitably decline. They tie their sense of self to things that are, by nature, temporary and unstable. And then they are shocked when those things change. The Stoic project is not about giving up on the second column. It is not about becoming passive or indifferent to the world. It is about recognizing with total honesty where your power actually lies, and then investing everything you have in that space. Think about this in your own life for a moment. How much of your stress comes from trying to control things that were never yours to control? The opinions of a colleague, the outcome of a decision already made, whether someone texts you back, whether the market goes up or down. Epictetus is not saying those things do not matter. He is saying that confusing them with the things you can actually influence is the root of nearly all unnecessary suffering. Suffering begins when you confuse the two. This is not a cold philosophy. It is a compassionate one. It says, you are spending your energy in the wrong place. You are fighting a battle you were never equipped to win. Come back to the territory that is actually yours and tend it with everything you have. Under Musonius, Epictetus does not just learn ideas, he practices them. Stoic education in this period includes deliberate exposure to discomfort, cold, hunger, physical labor, not as punishment, but as training. The same way an athlete conditions the body to handle what competition will demand, a Stoic conditions the mind to handle what life will demand. Loss, humiliation, injustice, pain. These are not hypothetical scenarios in a philosophy classroom. For a man born into slavery with a broken leg, they are Tuesday. And that is precisely the point. Epictetus is not theorizing about hardship. He is reporting from the front lines. Somewhere in this period, a shift happens. The details are lost, but the result is clear. Epictetus is freed. The historical record does not tell us when or exactly how. Manumission, the formal release from slavery, is common in Rome for educated household slaves. Epaphroditus may have freed him as a reward, or it may have been arranged after Epaphroditus himself fell from power. But here is what matters. Epictetus will later say that his freedom did not begin on the day his chains were removed. It began the moment he stopped demanding control over what was not his. Freedom begins where reaction ends. As a freedman, Epictetus does something remarkable. He opens a school of philosophy in Rome. Picture this for a moment. A former slave, a man who was once literal property, stands in front of the sons of senators, wealthy merchants, aspiring politicians, and teaches them what freedom means. He walks with a limp. He owns almost nothing, and they come to him. They come because he speaks with an authority that has nothing to do with status. His authority comes from having lived every word he teaches. When he says that external things cannot touch the inner self, he is not making a philosophical argument. He is making a personal testimony. His teaching style is conversational, direct, and sometimes startlingly blunt. He does not lecture in the way we might imagine a philosopher lecturing, with careful, abstract arguments built from first principles. He teaches the way a coach talks to athletes before a difficult game. If you lose everything tomorrow, who are you? This is not a rhetorical question for Epictetus. It is a diagnostic. If the answer depends on your job title, your bank account, your relationship status, your follower count, then you have built your identity on ground that can shift at any moment. You have made yourself dependent on things you do not control. And dependency is the opposite of freedom, no matter how comfortable the cage. In 93 AD, the Emperor Domitian, a man consumed by suspicion, issues a decree. All philosophers are to be expelled from Rome. Domitian fears the influence of teachers who encourage independent thought. A mind that cannot be controlled is a threat to a tyrant. Epictetus leaves. He does not protest. He does not organize resistance. He does not rage against the injustice of it. Not because he lacks courage, but because he has already answered the question. Exile is not under his control. His response is. He settles in Nicopolis, a city in northwestern Greece, founded by Augustus to commemorate the Battle of Actium. It is not Rome. It has no grand amphitheaters, no political intrigue, no proximity to imperial power. It is, in a word, quiet. And in that quiet, Epictetus builds what will become the most influential school of Stoic philosophy in the ancient world. In Nicopolis, Epictetus organizes his teaching around three disciplines, three areas of training that, taken together, form a complete program for living with clarity, integrity, and peace. The first is the discipline of desire. This is about wanting the right things. Most suffering, Epictetus teaches, comes from desiring what we cannot guarantee and fearing what we cannot prevent. Train yourself to desire only what is within your power, your own virtue, your own effort, your own good judgment, and you become, in a meaningful sense, invulnerable. Not because nothing bad happens, but because what matters most is always accessible. The second is the discipline of action. This is about doing the right things. You live in a community. You have roles: parent, friend, citizen, colleague. The Stoic does not withdraw from the world. The Stoic acts within it with purpose and care, fulfilling obligations not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because acting well is itself the point. The third is the discipline of assent. This is perhaps the most subtle and the most powerful. It is about how you interpret what happens to you. Before any event produces an emotional response, there is a moment, a fraction of a second, where your mind assigns meaning to the event. The discipline of assent is about catching that moment, pausing before you agree with your first impression, asking, is this judgment accurate, or is my mind adding something that is not there? A traffic jam is not inherently frustrating. A rude email is not inherently devastating. A job rejection is not inherently a statement about your worth. These events become those things only when your mind signs off on a particular interpretation. The discipline of assent is about slowing that process down enough to choose your interpretation, rather than having it chosen for you. One of Epictetus's most memorable teachings is the metaphor of life as a stage performance. You did not write the play. You did not choose your role. You may have been cast as a beggar, a king, a cripple, a parent, a person who lives a long life, or a person whose time is short. None of that is up to you. What is up to you is how you perform the role you have been given. If you are cast as a person who limps, play it well. If you are cast as a person who struggles, play it well. If you are cast as a person who loses everything, play it well. Dignity lies in execution, not circumstance. This is not resignation. This is the deepest possible commitment to the one arena where you have total authority, the quality of your response. Epictetus teaches in Nicopolis for decades. He never writes a single book. He never publishes a treatise. He simply teaches, day after day, student after student, the same essential lessons applied to an endless variety of human problems. One of his students, a young Roman named Arrian, decides to write down what he hears. He records Epictetus's lectures in a work called The Discourses and distills the core teachings into a short handbook, the Enchiridion. Arrian writes in his preface that he tried to capture Epictetus's actual words, his tone, his directness, his habit of challenging students mid-sentence. These are not polished philosophical essays. They are the words of a living teacher, preserved by a student who understood their value. It is through these texts that Epictetus's influence begins to travel, and it travels far. Generations after Epictetus's death, a man named Marcus Aurelius becomes emperor of Rome. He is arguably the most powerful person alive. He commands legions. He governs millions. The known world bends to his decisions. And at night, on the frontiers of the empire, in a tent surrounded by the machinery of war, Marcus Aurelius opens his private journal and writes notes to himself about how to be a good person. His journal, which we now call the Meditations, is saturated with the influence of Epictetus. Not just the ideas, but the tone, the directness, the insistence on returning again and again to the only question that matters: what is up to me and what is not? Think about what is happening here. The most powerful man in the world is being guided by the teachings of a former slave, a man who never held political office, never commanded an army, never accumulated wealth, and whose ideas are now shaping the conscience of an emperor. This is not a coincidence. It is proof of the idea itself. If wisdom is truly independent of circumstance, then it can come from anywhere. It does not require a palace. It does not require a degree. It requires only the willingness to pay attention and to practice. Epictetus dies around 135 AD in Nicopolis, likely in old age. There is no grand funeral, no marble monument, no state-sponsored ceremony. But the ideas do not die. In the centuries after his death, the Enchiridion is copied by monks, studied by early Christian theologians, carried across borders and translated into languages Epictetus never heard. In the 20th century, a fighter pilot named James Stockdale is shot down over Vietnam and held as a prisoner of war for over 7 years. He is tortured, isolated, stripped of every external support. He later says that the single thing that kept him alive, that kept his mind intact, was the philosophy of Epictetus, a book he had read before deploying. In the late 20th century, psychologist Albert Ellis draws directly on Epictetus to develop rational emotive behavior therapy, one of the foundations of modern cognitive behavioral therapy. The idea that our emotions are shaped by our interpretations, not by events themselves, is now a cornerstone of psychological treatment for anxiety, depression, and trauma. It comes in a direct line from a slave who taught in a Greek backwater 2,000 years ago. The Stoic insight does not expire. It does not become outdated by technology or social change. It endures because it addresses something permanent about the human condition. We will always face things we cannot control. The question is whether we will exhaust ourselves fighting that fact or learn to work with it. Near the end of his life, so the story goes, a student comes to Epictetus in distress over something he has lost. We do not know what it was, a relationship, a position, a dream. Epictetus looks at him and says something very simple. You are still here. You can still choose. That is all you ever had. There is a profound kindness in this. It is not dismissive. It is not telling the student that his loss does not matter. It is reminding him of something he has forgotten, that the capacity to choose, to respond, to begin again, to decide who you will be in the face of what has happened, is not something that was taken from him. It is the one thing that cannot be taken. We live in a time of extraordinary noise. Information arrives every second. Opinions are weaponized. The economy shifts. Relationships fracture. The news cycle delivers a fresh crisis before breakfast. And in the middle of all of it, the same question waits, patient, unmoving, as old as philosophy itself. What is up to me? Not what do I wish were up to me, not what I am afraid is up to me, but what, right now, today, can I actually influence with my choices? Epictetus did not leave us a system for becoming powerful. He left us something more useful, a system for becoming free. Free from the tyranny of other people's opinions. Free from the exhausting need to control outcomes. Free from the lie that your worth depends on your circumstances. They broke his leg. They owned his labor. They controlled his circumstances, but they never controlled his mind. And that, in the end, is quiet power. If this video made you pause, even for a moment, consider subscribing. We tell stories about the ideas that outlast empires, stories for people who are paying attention.